Hi, I'm Tyler.
And I'm Danny.
And we're with Oregon Spinal Cord Injury Connection. Today's video is all about caster wheels. We're going to talk about how to clean them and also how to replace the bearings.
Naturally, casters pick up a lot of dirt and debris because of how close they are to the ground. It's important to check and clean them regularly to prevent damage from occurring over time. If you're noticing resistance with your casters even after you've cleaned them, it's likely that damage has already occurred. And that's why we're also going to show you how to replace the bearings.
For more information on this and other wheelchair maintenance topics, we offer in-person wheelchair maintenance workshops. To find out more information about those, you can go to our website. Here in front of me, I have a couple different styles of caster wheels for demonstrating how to remove the caster wheel from the caster fork. In all three examples, even though these are all different styles, they're all going to have some kind of axle that holds this wheel onto this caster fork. This, for example, is a caster wheel that came off of a folding style wheelchair. For this, we're going to need a 5/8 inch wrench on either side of the axle and the nut. You can either use two 5/8 inch open-ended wrenches, or you can use one wrench and one socket. I'm going to hold the axle with a wrench back here and then use the ratchet to loosen the nut from the end. Once it's loose enough, we can take it off the rest of the way just using our fingers. Place the nut to the side. And now we're ready to remove this axle. We can just grab the caster wheel with one hand and pull out the axle with the other. And now the caster wheel is loose from the caster fork. This is another example of a caster wheel that came off of a manual wheelchair. And this style of wheel is going to use a dual-sided caster fork. So there's a side of the fork on either side of the wheel itself. This style of wheel also typically uses spacers in between the frame here and the actual wheel itself. Refer back to the photo that you took earlier to remember if yours have any kind of configuration different from this one. Here we have a symmetrical style of wheel mounting. So there's the same size spacer on either side of the wheel. Yours may be asymmetrical, in which case there's going to be one long and one short one. Just refer to your reference photo to make sure that everything goes back the way that it's supposed to. For this style of wheel, typically you'll find that the axle is held on using some sort of hex bolt. In this case, we have a 3mm. So I'm going to hold the one side with one Allen wrench and turn the other side loose. Now we can carefully remove this small bolt. To push the axle out of this frame, I'm going to take one of my Allen wrenches and push it in the side that I just removed this bolt from. And now we can push and pull this axle all the way out of the wheel. Now we can start slowly pulling this out and remove these pieces as we go. So here comes one of the spacers. There's one. Now we can pull it a little farther and take the wheel out. And now we have our final small spacer here. There we go. We have this style removed from its frame. Finally, we also have a single-sided caster fork. These are becoming more common on some higher end and super lightweight wheelchairs. As you can see, what's different from the dual-sided fork is that we only have one frame piece that connects the caster wheel to the rest of the wheelchair. In these cases, we want to find the bolt that is not on the side of the frame and loosen that using usually a hex wrench. In this case, we have a 4mm. So I'm going to put my wrench in there and loosen it. Until we can remove the bolt by hand. And now we can pull this wheel off of the caster fork. One thing to note about this style is that the axle remains connected to this frame throughout the entire process. So here we go. We have another caster wheel removed from our caster fork. When I'm working on someone's wheelchair, I like to turn it upside down and put it on a workbench just like this one. That way the caster wheels are at a nice and comfortable height for me. Before you get started and before you take anything apart, It's also a really good idea to get out your cell phone and take a quick picture of the wheels. There are 3 different adjustment positions here that this caster wheel could go into, and it could really mess with the person's handling if we put that wheel back in the wrong spot. This can also help us if we can't remember what order the spacers go in or anything like that. So take a quick picture and then you're ready to start working on it.
All right, if you're working on your own chair, you're going to want to transfer out of it onto some other surface. For me personally, I like sitting on my couch while I'm working on my chair, something that's similar to height in this chair. You may prefer a different surface or to sit on the floor. The most important thing is that you're comfortable and that you are in a safe enough position to work on your chair. In order for the casters to be at a workable level, I typically tip my chair back like this and rest the backrest on the ground. If you need to adjust the height of where your casters are and where you're working on them, you can add a box or a crate behind the backrest on the ground to adjust where they are in front of you. If you have anti-tippers on the back of your chair, you'll need to remove them or flip them up in order to flip your chair backwards this way. All right, now I'm going to show you how I clean my casters and check the bearings. Further along in the video, we'll get into specifics about determining caster size and replacing bearings. It can seem pretty overwhelming at first, but the more that you clean your casters, the more natural it will become. For me, I have found I can do it pretty quickly now, sometimes even in the back seat of my car. So I use a compact Allen wrench tool like this. I highly recommend getting one. I like them because they're easy to keep in a small bag. You have a larger area to grip, and you don't have to worry about losing any of the individual wrenches. I also like to use a small dish or a bowl or container to make sure I don't lose any of the caster pieces as I'm cleaning. Caster wheels can get pretty gross from frequent use, and debris may even fall off as you're removing them, so I'd recommend using a towel underneath the caster area. First, I remove the axle from the caster. For my chair, I use a 3mm Allen wrench on both sides. If your caster forks are pretty tight, your wheel won't just fall off. But if the caster fork is looser, then you may want to just have your hand under it so it doesn't fall. Then I pull the caster off the caster fork like this, and as you can see, it's pretty gross. So I typically use a towel or a rag to clean the debris off. I pull out the spacers like this, and then I just clean all the hair and gunk off. If there's any mud or something stuck to the spacers or the caster itself, I'll use a damp rag or a mild cleaner to get that off. If there's any hair stuck in the bearing itself, I go ahead and pull that out. Sometimes it's just lint, and other times it's more debris. To check the bearings to see if they're doing okay or if they need to be replaced, I just hold the caster like this and give it a spin. It feels good to me. So now I'm just going to work on putting it back onto my caster fork. Before I replace everything, I wipe it off one more time just to make sure I've cleaned it enough. With these types of spacers, they have an offset sleeve that fit into the bearing itself, and they're 2 different sizes. So I just have to be aware of which size goes in which side. So that goes here. The nice thing about this is it's already in the wheel when you're setting it into your caster fork. If it is a little bit tight, you might need to pull the caster fork out a little bit to try and fit it in to the fork area. You want to take note of which hole you had the axle through and make sure that matches the other side when you're putting it back. And then you may have the spacer in between the two bearings in the wheel kind of block the axle from going through, so I like to use an Allen wrench to go through and just kind of move it out of the way. You just kind of wiggle it around. There we go. All right, now just adding the bolt on the other side. And then tightening it back down. You don't want to tighten it too much because you don't want to strip the bolts that go in the ends. And then you have a clean, well-working caster.
With our caster wheel removed from our wheelchair, we're now ready to perform some cleaning and make an assessment of the bearings. To clean it, I'm just going to grab a rag. If you need to, you can use any kind of light degreaser and just give the bearings a quick clean. Make sure that the spokes are nice and clean as well. If there's any hair or debris that's stuck on that axle or the spacers, you can pull that off right now and just make sure that everything looks nice and shiny. Now that everything is clean, we can make an accurate assessment of the bearings themselves. So I'm going to take one of my fingers and give the bearing a little bit of a spin here. If I feel any kind of grit or resistance, anything that feels like there's steps in the bearing instead of a smooth roll, then it's probably time to replace the bearings. In this case, we're going to do a bearing replacement. I have some fresh bearings here. They are a size 608, and there's a bunch of different sizes for a variety of caster wheel designs. The way that you can figure out what size bearing you need for your caster wheels is by looking for the bearing designation number. So somewhere on the bearing, there will be printed a very small raised number. In this case, I know that these are size 608. Yours might be R6 or 6801. There's a variety of sizes, but you should be able to see some kind of text on the bearing itself that tells you what size you're going to need. To remove the bearings from the caster wheel, I'm going to grab a couple tools. I'm going to grab a roll of tape. Really what you need is something that will elevate the caster wheel off of the work surface and something that has a hole in it. You can also use two 2x4s. You can use a bench vise. For me, I think that a roll of tape does a surprisingly good job. So now we have our wheel elevated off the work surface, and we have a void here that we can punch the bearings down into. In order to actually punch those bearings, we're going to use a metal punch. You can use any size that fits. I've found that the 3/16 inch size is my favorite. And then we're also going to need a hammer. I'm going to take this punch and I'm going to angle it down and aim until I feel a notch in the lower bearing. This upper bearing here is currently blocked, so we need to reach all the way through the caster wheel until we're locked in and notched on that lower bearing. So here I can feel that notch. It feels solid, and I'm going to give it a couple light taps with the hammer. And then boom, the bearing fell out, and it has fallen right into the hole provided by the tape. Now there's only one bearing left. So all we need to do is flip the wheel over from how we just had it, and we can do the same operation of taking our punch and a hammer and quickly punching that bearing out of the caster wheel. So now we have an empty hole here in the middle, and we're ready to install the new bearings. Here we have our caster wheel with the bearings removed, and we're ready to push the new bearings back in. There are some specialized tools that you can purchase that will help you do this. I like to make my own using some odds and ends that you can get at the hardware store. you're going to need a bolt that is long enough to fit through your caster wheel with a little bit of extra space. And you're also going to need some washers that are the proper size to fit around the bearings that you have, depending on your size of bearing. I also have here a 13mm socket and a 13mm wrench, and I'm going to use those to tighten this nut and bolt and squeeze everything together to make sure that it's pressed nicely into the caster wheel here. I'm going to load this up by taking my bolt, taking one bearing, and then I'm going to slide on this small spacer that sits in between the bearings. I can insert that into the wheel, load on the bearing for the other side, put on my washers for the other side, and start screwing on the nut. Once it's hand tight, I can grab my wrenches and start tightening. As I go, that bolt is going to tighten against the nut and pull these bearings into the wheel. Once you find a nice kind of end point where everything feels snug, that's your stopping point, and you can remove your bearing press tool from the wheel. Now we have our caster wheel with our bearings and the spacer in between them all perfectly installed. These are brand new bearings, so they feel nice and smooth. You'll repeat this on your other caster wheel, and now we're ready to reassemble everything. I wanted to talk a little bit more about how I make my small bearing press tools. You can use any kind of threaded thing. In this case, we have a nut and a bolt. In this case, we have a piece of threaded rod with two nuts on the end of it. The important thing is that whatever tool you're using, it needs to be long enough to reach through the caster wheel that you're working on and have some extra space for the bearings. So for this caster wheel here, this smaller sized bolt will do just fine. I have enough room to push it through the caster wheel with extra space on either side. For a folding wheelchair style wheel like this one, this bolt would be too short. If I push it all the way in, I don't have any extra space. So for this, I can use this threaded rod instead, which will give me enough extra space that I have room to push the bearings into the wheel. The other thing that you'll need is a series of washers that is the correct size to press in your size of bearings. So I have a couple different examples here. These are a size 608 bearing, and you'll need a washer that is large enough to neatly fit around the edge of the bearing. This is a size 6801 bearing, a little bit skinnier on the inside, but it shares the same outside diameter, so you just need a washer that will neatly fit that same outside diameter. I also use a couple of extra washers just to help isolate the pressing motion from the rotating motion. Altogether, it looks like this. I have my bolt, a small washer, a large washer, then I would have my bearing, I would have the spacer in between them, another bearing, the other side washer, the other small washer, and then a nut. Using this tool, you can effectively press both of those bearings into a caster wheel by tightening either side of this and squeezing everything together.
All right, now we're going to put the casters back onto the caster forks. For this first one, in this case, the axle is this bolt here. So we're going to line up the caster with the setting that it was originally at. And this one went through just fine. Sometimes the spacer in between the two bearings is offset, and so I would recommend having a small Allen wrench nearby to be able to align the spacer in the middle with the bearings so that you can get the axle all the way through. Now we're just going to add the bolt on the other side, grab our wrenches, and tighten it up. So now we've got a fully functioning caster. Okay, so putting the caster back onto the caster fork for this one is a little bit more complicated. The challenge here is that we have a spacer on each side of the caster that needs to fit between the caster and the caster fork. So we're going to start with the axle and put that through the caster fork. Then we're going to add one of the spacers and then add the caster itself. And in this case, you also still have the spacer between the two bearings, so you'll want to line that up with something like a small Allen wrench. All right. Now with the spacer on the other side, this is where it can get tricky sometimes. So because some caster forks may be kind of tight, you might need to kind of pry it in a little bit to be able to fit the spacer in between. Once it's lined up, you can push the axle the rest of the way through and then add the bolt back on the other side. Now we're going to take our Allen wrenches and tighten that up. And we're good to go. Okay, for this one, it's probably going to be the easiest one. We don't have any spacers we need to worry about, and we just have one bolt on one side. So we're going to take the caster and fit it onto the axle. Add the bolt on the other side. Tighten it up with the Allen wrench. And we're good to go. Thanks for watching our video. We hope you found it helpful. OSCI's mission is to ensure everyone in Oregon who sustains a spinal cord injury has the care and community they need to thrive. If you're newly injured or you don't feel like you're thriving, we encourage you to connect with one of our community health workers by emailing us at contact@oregonsci.org.
For more information about our programs, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook. Visit our website, OregonSCI.org, to check out our upcoming events, including our in-person wheelchair maintenance workshops and our community meetups.